If you're a corporate business managing foreign exchange exposure, then you've probably noticed something strange. Every provider tells you they're different. Every broker tells you they're like no other. And every bank says that they care about the outcome. When you actually try and manage FX risk properly, most of them end up doing exactly the same thing. They take your requirement, give you a rate, and then move on. I'm Dave Huggett, and I've spent 15 years in foreign exchange markets. And today I want to show you why the provider you choose matters far more than the rate that they quote. But before we talk about strategy, execution, or hedging, we need to understand the landscape. Because if you don't understand how your provider makes money, then you can't understand whether their advice serves you or them. There are essentially three models in the FX industry: banks, apps, and brokers. And there's also a fourth option that not many people know about: consultants. Let me walk you through all four, starting with the one that 80% of corporate businesses still use: banks. Banks are the default choice. Makes sense. Your money's already there, you trust them, they're visible, they're established, and they're regulated. So why do you need to go anywhere else? Because here's the problem. If you're transacting material amounts regularly, you'll never find one person at the bank that owns your problem or your situation. They just don't have the capacity. That means that no one's actually learning what drives your business, and no one understands how market moves actually affect your margin. And above all, no one's actually building a strategy that suits you. It's reactive, it's transactional, most of the time it's expensive. And the banking model from an FX point of view used to work like this. They'd have 10 clients, charge each of them 1% on every trade they make. That's it. Simple. But then banks realized that they could actually charge 2, 3, 4%, and 3 out of 10 clients would still trade at that level without asking any questions. Same revenue, a third of the effort, a much better setup for the bank. So if you're in that 3 out of 10, then you're subsidizing everyone else's pricing. It's not a criticism, it's just how the large institutions work. The second model is apps or fintechs, and they've grown massively over the last 10 years. When I started in FX, they weren't really a thing. But now they do one thing brilliantly. They make transactions super easy and super simple to execute, but only if the numbers are small, because they work on a volume model. They don't care about small payments, they just want lots of them, because they can offer that and provide that execution at massive scale. But when the numbers get bigger, that business model starts to break. Why? Because apps are built for volume. It's as simple as that. Mostly automated, heavily reliant on AI now, and their business model works simply on attracting as much flow as possible, which means they can't afford to spend time on each individual client case, especially if it's complicated. And they definitely can't help build strategy or hedging or risk management or protection or anything like that. Under certain thresholds, compliance is really light, so transactions move through the system quickly. But once you're dealing with 6 or 7 figures regularly, suddenly there's friction. Delays, questions, requests for paperwork, automated flags that require human intervention, except there's no one human that knows your business. If you need structure, planning, or strategic advice, apps just aren't built for that. They're built for convenience at scale. And when your requirement moves beyond convenience, the app model doesn't work anymore. The third model is brokers, third-party providers of foreign exchange. And this is where it gets a bit more complicated, because broker is a huge umbrella. Some brokers look like banks with slightly better services. Others look like apps with account managers bolted on. But the common thread is this: most brokers operate a KPI-driven, sales-led business model. They have targets, volume metrics, and revenue goals. I'm definitely not saying that good people don't work for brokerages. Many do, and it's where I spent most of my career. But when the business model is built around hitting numbers, the advice and guidance you get is shaped around what helps that broker hit those numbers. You often get pushed towards trades, pressured around timing, and then complexity is sold as sophistication. For example, FX options that generate much bigger margins are getting recommended more and more often. Forwards get extended, and the positive terms around those forward contracts are often withheld. It's not malicious, it's just structural, but the incentives don't align. And when incentives don't align, the receiver of the product or service often isn't the biggest benefactor. So what's the answer? Well, consultants. The industry's evolved away from the need to be part of a big business or a large city-based firm. Now, consultants have access to exactly the same market and products, but can operate anywhere on a much more concentrated and service-led level. Consultants exist to serve a certain type of client with a very specific need. If your FX exposure is large enough, sensitive enough, or complex enough, that poor decisions have real consequences, you need more than a rate and a platform. And this is where consultants work great. First of all, you need someone that understands your business and why it's exposed to FX in the first place. Someone that builds strategy around your risk profile and not their revenue target. Someone who's available when markets move or when a deal timeline shifts. But most importantly, somebody that isn't trading as many clients as they can get their hands on in order to hit those numbers. Consultants work on a very curated number of clients, meaning that the quality of their client book is far, far higher because they have fewer of them and they're able to provide that service to a much, much higher standard. But these relationships take time and they take effort from both sides, which is why it can't work for hundreds and hundreds of clients. But for the businesses we do work with, the relationship is very different. Most importantly, it's advisory and not transactional. Decisions are made around strategy and not sales, and the outcome is much better. Don't get me wrong though, it doesn't work for every business. If you're moving small amounts occasionally, it's overkill. You don't need a consultant. But if risk matters to the outcome of the business, then the difference can be significant. So here's what you should do. Ask yourself, does my current provider understand what drives my business? Do they know my exposure profile? Can they explain their strategy recommendation without mentioning the rate first? If the answer is no, you're probably under the wrong model. And if you're being chased by brokers or feeling pressured by banks, then just work back from the problem you're trying to solve. Don't start with price, start with what you actually need. Provider's business model matters. Not because one is universally better than the other, but because each one serves a different requirement. And if the model doesn't match your need, then you're starting from the wrong place. In the next video, we're going to look in more detail at how the FX market actually works. Not the theory, the mechanics, or the structure, but the bits that the industry doesn't want you to understand, because clarity can remove their advantage. If you're a business and you have an exposure to foreign exchange and you found this video useful, there's a link in the description below where you can book a free strategy call. No sales pitch, just a conversation about what you're facing, what you're exposed to, and to just check whether what you're doing makes sense. Please like and subscribe, and thanks very much for watching.